Good morning. Thank you all for being here. What better way can you think of to spend a Saturday morning than being in this huge room talking about education? Just the fact that you are here gives me a lot of hope. So my name is Amanda Ripley, and I am a journalist who writes sometimes about education and sometimes about other things. And I'm really excited to be here because about 5 years ago, I was starting to write a book about what it's like to be a student in some of the smartest countries in the world. And so I wanted to follow 3 American exchange students who were leaving their homes and their high schools in the United States and going to spend 1 year in homes and high schools abroad so that I could have some chance of seeing the differences through their eyes. So I was country shopping, which is fun, and I was trying to figure out where to go. Which of the smartest countries in the world should I go to? It was very fun. I recommend it. And there was one country that I really wanted to go to more than all the others. One country that had more to teach the United States at this moment in time than any country in the world. Unfortunately, there were no American students interested in going there on exchange. And so I could not find a student to follow to this country. So I settled for Finland, South Korea, Poland, fascinating places, wonderful students that I had the chance to follow and get to know really well. But I've been waiting for this moment, because here today we are going to properly visit this country that I'm talking about. This country is Canada. This is a country. Now, there's a lot of countries that Americans don't understand, right? But we know we don't understand. We kind of know we don't understand them. The issue here is that we think we understand Canada, and we don't, okay? So I'm going to start by saying, unless you, who here lives in Canada? Okay, everybody else, you don't know. You don't know Canada, okay? So we're going to do a crash course, just a couple minutes here. I'm going to tell you things that might blow your mind that you can use later at parties about Canada. And then we have some very special guests who are going to come up here with me and explain to you from their personal experience what has happened with education in Canada. So, one quick fact is that Canadian 15-year-olds outperform American 15-year-olds in math, reading, and science on a test called the PISA test of critical thinking that's administered every 3 years to 70 countries. Interestingly, the top 25% richest Canadian kids outperform the top 25% richest American kids in math by a significant difference. And by the way, our richest kids are richer. The poorest Canadian kids, bottom 25% by socioeconomic status, outperform the poorest American kids who are richer. So we are seeing at every age and income level a significant difference. Why this is interesting to me is because Canada is not Finland. Canada is not Finland. It kind of feels like it. I mean, it's cold, I'm going to be honest, but as the people who are here from Canada will tell you, it's very different from Finland. Here's one difference. There is no national education policy in Canada. So if you think Americans don't like their national central government messing with education, you should go to Canada. They don't like it either. Everything is run at the province and district level, okay? Sort of like the state and local level in the United States. So it's decentralized, which makes it hard to make changes at scale, right? Makes it kind of messy. Another difference, Finland has a 4% child poverty rate, which is and should be the envy of the world. Canada has a 15% child poverty rate by the same metric. The US is closer to 20%. So Canada has significant levels of child poverty. Canada, I think, if we're being honest, I think a lot of Americans think Canada is a huge, vast expanse of white. White people, snow, occasionally an ice hockey rink. In reality, are you ready? This is going to blow your mind. 1 out of every 5 people in Canada was not born in that country. The equivalent in the United States is 1 out of every 8. We have never going back 160 years in this country, have never had the immigrant intake that Canada has. Now, let's break it down a little bit. Remember, I said that provinces are really where the action is at, right? So we're going to talk today about Ontario. We're going to talk about Ontario for a bunch of reasons, one of which is Ontario went through a significant series of reforms in recent enough history that people can remember it, and we have one of those people here to tell you about it today. But those reforms have started around 2003, 2004, and since they started doing that, Ontario's high school graduation rate has gone up significantly. And the gap between English language learner students and native Canadians has shrunk. The difference between the highest scoring Canadian 15-year-olds on the PISA test and the lowest scoring Canadian 15-year-olds is smaller than average for the developed world. So what that means, right, is that there's more equity. More equity. Not as much as there should be or could be, but more equity than in the United States or, say, France. So Canada's performing at the level of Finland with significantly more poverty, diversity, and complexity of structure. Okay. Within Ontario, the province, the biggest city is, of course, Toronto. Who's been to Toronto? There we go. Okay. So you know, it's a big city. It's about the size of Chicago, much bigger than Washington, D.C., where I live, where we are right now. This is a city with 250,000 students in its main public school district. And there are 230 different ethnic groups, I believe, within Toronto. So that's a significant level of diversity. I did not know this. I just learned there are 3 Afrocentric schools in Toronto. And it is actually one of the world's most diverse cities. So that's why we're going to zoom in a little bit in our conversation on the Toronto area, because in many ways it is more relevant to many of our cities and states. Before I invite 2 of our special guests up to the stage, I want to just acknowledge something. Understanding a country is hard. We're not going to do it in 90 minutes. Try to think about a person you know well. Understanding a person is hard. Think of all the internal contradictions, the blind spots, the hypocrisies. Now imagine doing that for millions and millions of people. It's a hot mess, I'm not going to lie to you. But because so many of you, who is a TFA alumni in here? Okay, so I know that you can handle hard stuff. If there's nothing else I know about you, you can deal with some complexity and uncertainty. So that's what we're going to do. And the reason to do it, even though it's hard, is because there is incredible hope in other countries. I know that we have had a lot of changes in our schools around this country in the past 10 years. We've had a lot of fights, God knows. And we've seen some progress. Here in Washington, D.C., where my son attends public school. In New Orleans, and different places where many of you are from. But you know, we haven't seen a single state achieve what Canada has achieved, what Ontario has achieved. We have not seen a single state improve at the rate of Poland in the past 10 years. So, it is important to think big, to look beyond our borders, so that we know what is possible at scale, and we do not settle for less. Because once you know what's possible, you have a moral imperative to try to understand what happened in those places, as difficult as it is. Okay, so we're going to zoom in, and we're going to start at a personal, micro level to try try to chip away at the mystery of Ontario and what happened there. So at this point, I would like to invite Khadija Lam and Meryl Matthews up to the stage to join me. Khadija is 14 years old. She moved to Canada when she was 11 months old from Pakistan with her family. Her father, Mohammed, is here. We are so glad that he was able to join us. Come on up. Come on up, Meryl. You're not getting out of this. Okay. Go ahead and sit wherever you... That's good, yeah. Meryl Matthews is the principal of a brand new school. Go ahead and sit right there. Thank you. We're casual. We're friends. Okay, so he worked, he was born in Canada. His family immigrated there from India. And Meryl worked on equity issues. He was a teacher. He worked across the district on many things. And then one day he got to do what so many teachers dream of doing and open his own dream school, the Irma Colson Primary School. And that is where Khadija was a student. You started 3 years ago there, right? 2.5. So she's since graduated and moved on to high school. But we wanted to bring them here today because Meryl and Khadija's school is a middle school right outside of Toronto in a suburb called Milton that was growing very, very fast, is still growing fast. And this school is really all about equity, and it was designed that way by Meryl and his team from the beginning. So that's why we wanted to kind of zoom in on it and understand through the lens of a student and a principal what that looks like in Ontario. So first of all, let's give them a round of applause for being here. Thank you very much. Meryl, your school has a third of the children are children of immigrants at the school, right? And there are 47 different languages. How many of the students are visible minorities, would you say, of the 1,100 students, roughly?
So easily a third of our population are visible minorities.
Okay. And why was it important to you that your background, you could relate to some of these students? What about your background was sort of unusual for principals in Ontario when you started?
So that is so much of my family story. So my parents came in 1966, not knowing the education system, not knowing what Ontario was all about, but they had this hope and this promise that their children were going to get a better education and a better life than they have. And it's an amazing promise that you also look back and you realize that your parents sacrificed so much so you could have that better life. And it's amazing in terms of where I was given the opportunity to open a brand new school as a principal. I knew the families I was going to serve were very similar to that story that my family experienced. And it's an amazing part of my journey in terms of where you will get to hear from Dr. Avis Glaze, who 10 years ago, I was very fortunate to have her as my boss. And the inspiration she was to me, where she did give us, charged us with that understanding that in Ontario, it is possible to close that achievement gap, that it's possible to have equity of outcome at the center of everything you do. So when I had the opportunity to open a school, and yes, we're at 1,000 students now, we have 13 portables outside of our school. So I have a school outside of a school now because of the fact of how fast we're growing. Every single day I walk into that building, the hands I shake, the parents I meet, they know they have a place they belong. They never have to feel they're on the outside, they just drop off their children and they walk away. No, they can come in. They can ask the question. They can be a part of what we've built as a community. Because that's coming back to my own personal story, where my parents did not get to experience that. Not that they didn't want to enter the school. They had so much respect for the school that they didn't know how to do that. But I think in terms of Ontario's context, we are so engaged in how it is that we build community.
Thank you, Meryl. Khadija, when we met for coffee yesterday, I was going on and on about the Smithsonian and the museum and the Spy Museum, and she listened very politely, very respectfully, and then she said, "Are there any record stores in DC?" So Khadija plays 6 instruments. She has a fantastic YouTube channel that you should definitely check out. Last night, my son and I, sorry to embarrass you, but we watched the ukulele cover of the Taylor Swift song that you did. That was awesome. And so she's got a lot of talents. She's fascinated by English, by writing, by speaking, by performing, by music. We're going to see a little bit of that later. But I want to start by asking you, so when you walked into Merrill's school a couple of years ago, you'd been to 5 other schools already around the area, and you were nervous, which is normal, right? Over time, it seems like you really came into your own at that school. And it's a school that you know, even if Merrill weren't here, you'd probably say you have a lot of affection for the school. Yeah. So let's just start with the obvious question, which is, what is a great school? Like, what are we trying to do here? How do you know it when you see it?
I think a lot of it has to do with not only just the staff, but also the students, and the fact that the teachers give the students opportunities to decide how they want to learn and how they want the school to look like and run.
So it's not just about what the adults are doing, but what the students are doing. And you talked about how you hadn't heard the word equity before you came into the school. How long did it take before you heard it?
I think just the first day, because when you walk into the school, you see all these quotes written on the walls, and equity and excellence for all is one of them. And so I was like, what does that mean? And so Mr. Matthews had explained that to me, and we talked a lot about it in assemblies.
What does it mean? Just so we can, and by the way, I'm not going to say you're right or wrong, but what does it mean to you, equity?
I think it means that everybody gets the tools and the resources they need in order to succeed.
Okay. So there's a lot of schools that have quotes on the wall, posters, inspirational pictures. I've been to some just abysmal schools with beautiful quotes on the wall. So have you, probably. I see people nodding. Every country I've been to, there's some poster about respect. Every single country. and about obeying the rules, essentially, is what it means. But sometimes it takes other forms, like, tolerance. But they only mean tolerance for certain things, right? How did you get the sense, because students are really good at figuring out if something is for real or just hype. Can you give me one example of how you knew that this equity talk wasn't just talk? Does anything come to mind?
I remember, this has to do with the extracurricular activities, but the students were told that if there was some club that you wanted to see, you didn't just have to go to the student council, because we didn't have a student council. If you could find a teacher that was willing to help supervise that, you could start it up. And a lot of the clubs were student-led, so that gave them a voice.
Did you ever ask to start something or do something? Did you ever take advantage of that?
Not a club, but there's this thing called Pink Shirt Day, and so I'd heard about that, and I thought, this seems important, and we should bring awareness to this. And
yeah, so let me just quickly explain. In 2007 in Nova Scotia, there was at a high school, I believe, there was a boy who came to school in a pink shirt, and he was made fun of by other kids. So one other boy saw this, 17-year-old, I think, and he decided that he would go to the store and buy like a pack of 20 or 50 pink shirts. I think they were tank tops, actually, just to be specific. And he distributed them to all his friends, and they came in all wearing pink the next day. And he talked about how he saw the kid who had been made fun of. And it was like, when he saw the pink shirts, it was like this load had been lifted from his shoulders. So this became a thing in Canada and some other countries, I think. And it's actually February 24th, so mark it down. And so you started this at your school. How did you do it? You brought it to a teacher, or?
Yeah, so we have this club called Me to We, or We Take Action, and our librarian is the one that runs that. And so one of the people in the club, they told me about this story, and so we went to our librarian. We're like, oh, we have this idea to bring it to the school. And so then we brought it to Mr. Matthews, and of course he gave us the green light, and so that's that.
And did kids wear pink shirts? Did it work?
Okay. Yes.
You also told me that you had a Black History Month assembly, as many schools around the United States and Canada are doing this month. But unlike all the Black History Month assemblies that I've been to, it was led by students.
Yes.
In fact, you were part of that whole process.
Yeah.
Now, was it really led by students, or was it like, okay, some teacher's going to tell you what to do, and you go up and read like a statement?
No, actually, I helped write the script, so the students decided, what we could talk about. So it was written in our voice, so it didn't seem like someone else was just putting the words in our mouth. And I think the reason for that is because sometimes younger students, they don't have, like the teachers don't have as much of an effect on them, but if they see, someone 2 or 3 years older than them talking about something, they're like, oh, that's interesting.
Resonates more.
Yeah.
It's more authentic, yeah. Meryl, can you talk a little bit about why this matters for learning? Like, can you bring this back to, okay, this is all nice, but like, seriously, we got to get stuff done. Like, kids need to learn. How does it relate?
So it all comes back to those relationships. It was such a mission of ours. When you talk about equity and excellence for all as a mission statement, it really comes down to how deeply do we know our students? How do we take the time to know our students? How do we also know that, as Khadija was sharing about Black History Month, it was a powerful statement to walk in and see in our school that Black History Month is every month. That was a tagline they created. And I so appreciated the opportunity. When you know your students that deeply, the curriculum comes to life then, doesn't it? And I know there are schools where you have been in where you've seen that. But the privilege I have as a principal, I get to give permission to that. I have to be the one that constantly reminds my teachers, yes, you're allowed to do that. Yes, you're allowed to have that conversation. One of the most powerful moments we had, even with Khadija's class as well, we had a Holocaust survivor come in. And it wasn't a standalone event. It wasn't just something that we wanted to talk about the Holocaust, but it was about understanding how do you bring about change in society? How do you bring about change around those things that really matter in the lives of students? And the power that students then feel that they can then change the world, that they can then change their community. That idea of equity doesn't just land in terms of that assembly, but it became more of what those teachers are doing in their classrooms. Khadija was very fortunate to also, like all the teachers I hired in my school, yes, I had a dream school. Yes, it was everything I could have imagined. But I hired teachers who came with that relationship at the heart of everything they do. So Khadija's teacher, Miss Walsh, she had her for 2 years. And they had a journey that they marked in terms of all the milestones and things that they were accomplishing as a class. And at the core of what we do, that's my inspiration in so many ways of those teachers in the building, that you as an administrator get to come alongside them and tell them, yeah, go for it. I've got you on this. I'm with you on this. And the incredible opportunities that come with that, it is something that is just, again, possible in terms of what we do around equity.
You're creating a culture of saying yes, which is not the default culture of institutions. I wonder, is there a risk that leads to a lack of focus? I mean, next thing you know, you got pink shirt day, red shirt day, blue shirt day. I mean, what about like calculus? Like, how do you stay focused if you're saying yes to everything?
So for us, everything's around high expectations. So the curriculum still is the focus of everything we do, and high expectations allows student achievement to be at the center of everything teachers then bring forward to students. So in other words, if you know your students best, they also know at the core of everything they do every day in class, if they struggle on something, they don't just have to sit there quietly. They don't just have to sit there and feel that somewhere on that next assessment or next test, that it's just too bad they're not going to get it. No, it becomes more of that voice that students have in terms of their success. So they feel ownership in terms of their learning. And because that's also something we have, again, in our time together, we've given students that permission as well when it comes to their voice. That they realize their success matters to us. So if they're not happy with how they're doing in school, they can actually say that to us. But if we know they're not doing as well as we know they should in school, we also get to have that conversation with them.
You know, it's interesting because we talk a lot about equity in the United States, which is obviously a good thing, but I never really hear it framed as equity, not just of income or race or ethnic background or language, but what we're talking about is also like of age and power. I mean, so if you say you have an equitable school, but the students don't have any voice, in what goes down in that school. Is that really equitable? For whom is that equitable? So I really like this linking of equity or broadening of it to include actual students. I did notice when I followed students to these other countries, I would ask them all kinds of questions. I had expectations for what I thought I would see, what I thought mattered, And most of the things I thought mattered, they did not care at all about. What they wanted to talk about was other students, because that's what influenced them the most, okay? So we all like to think that adults have this profound impact on students' lives, and that's true, but guess who has just as much or more impact? It's the other students that you're with, especially, I think, in middle school and high school, right? So unless they are part of the equity equation, then you're leaving a lot out of your frame, right? We know around the world that countries that have a systematic way to solicit and use, importantly, student opinion, tend to be more equitable countries. So you can actually see that in the data. And for those of you who, like me, are huge nerds, there is research showing what Meryl said now, that the deeper the relationship between teachers and students, the better the outcomes, and you can quantify it. Now, probably you shouldn't need research to know that, but it really matters more than I think people thought. And maybe it's because the relationship forces you to overcome your biases, forces you to not give up, right? There are probably different reasons. Last thing I want to ask you, Khadija, is tell me about the valedictorian. So you started out, Meryl said when he first met you, you were kind of quiet, very respectful. Over time, you started different things. You helped run Black History Month Assembly, and then you were elected by your peers to be valedictorian. What was your idea about how to deal with that? And it was an idea that you weren't sure how it would go over, right?
Yeah, so I have a passion for poetry and spoken word in particular. So I had this idea to write the speech in like a spoken word form, but I didn't really know how that would work because, traditional valedictorian speeches are very formal.
You have to quote Dr. Seuss,
yes.
And there's certain things you just have to do.
So I was kind of nervous to ask if I could do this, but I know I shouldn't have been because there's always been yeses whenever I've asked to do something. So
that's what you did.
Yeah.
How did it go down?
I think it was received really well.
What was it about, the spoken word?
It was about our journey over the past 2 years and all the lessons that we've learned and everything that we took from the 2 years together and how that kind of resonates with us now in high school.
Okay. So we are in for a nice little treat here, a little, palate cleanser before the next guest comes up. I've asked Khadija, and she very graciously has agreed to do a very short spoken word performance. Can you tell us what this piece is about? Just give us, or when you said it before, or how it came about.
Well, I was in Germany over this past summer, and I was talking to this one lady, and she asked me where I was from, and I told her Canada, and she was like, "Oh wow, I wouldn't have guessed with the," and so that kind of led me to thinking about what it meant to be Pakistani Canadian. And it's called The Hyphen,
And when did you perform it? When you performed it before,
yes.
Right? Publicly.
Yeah, it was at, there's this thing called the Welcome Center. It's this area in the Halton District School Board in our community. And it's basically for whether you're an immigrant or if you just moved from a different town, you just go in and then you kind of get the rundown of how things work.
And so you did it there?
Yeah, at the opening ceremony.
Okay. Well, I want to first give our panelists a round of applause and thank them for coming up. We are going to have both of them back up here, so don't worry, there's more. And now I'd like to invite Khadija to do her spoken word. Thank you very much, Khadija, for doing this. Go ahead and stand up.
The hyphen. What was meant to be a symbol of unification to me just seems to represent separation. A foot in both worlds, feeling as if you don't belong in either. To assimilate or to stick to your roots, I think I need to take a breather. But how do I breathe when people are telling me that I'm not a real Canadian, that I'm not meant to be? Now I'm thinking about the hyphen again, but this time I realize that it's a choice. When you get married, do you keep your name, or do you keep your last name, or do you take your others? They're both viable options. They show that you love your lover. Although I don't watch hockey and I don't put maple syrup on everything, I love Canada and all that that country brings. But I also love myself, my values, my beliefs, and everything else. So I'm proud to say that I am Pakistani Canadian, and wherever you may come from, I hope that you feel the same. Because that hyphen may trip you up and leave you with scars, but in the end, it's just a part of who you are.
Thank you, Khadija. Not every 14-year-old could stand up in front of 600 people and just pull that off like that. I know I couldn't do it now, for God's sake. So that was awesome. I want to just very quickly thank Jen Brenneman and Sarah Beth Berman from Teach for All for making sure we had a student on this panel. Most education panels do not have students. I don't know if you've noticed, but it drives me crazy. The reason they don't have them, among other things, is that it takes a little extra work. They did that work, and so I just want to thank Teach for All for making that possible. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Avis Glaze to the stage. Dr. Glaze is a former teacher, administrator, Ontario Education Commissioner. She's the current president of EduQuest International. She's consulted to countries around the world. Go ahead and take a seat. And she is an amazing person who can tell us about the history of the reforms in Ontario and what might be useful for us to learn from these places. I think, you know, one of the challenges is a lot of countries that improved, let's say Finland, that dramatically improved their system, the people who did that are long gone, usually. And so you can't, when you ask what happened, you get this kind of murky, you know, narrative that doesn't feel real, and it's frustrating. So the great thing about places like Canada, Poland, Estonia, is that it's recent enough that we can actually capture the oral history and what happened, so that we can learn from it, because it's never linear, it's never easy, it's never, you never know if you're doing it right when you're doing it, right? And it's easy to forget that with time. So let's start in, Avis, let's start in sort of chronological order. Can you kind of paint a picture for us of what the scene was like in Ontario education in the late 1990s, early 2000s, before we saw some of these reforms we're going to talk about? What was the feeling like among teachers?
Very good. Thank you very much. And thanks to Teach for America for making this possible for us to be here. And I'm going to answer your question, but let me thank all the individuals here for choosing the most wonderful profession. Thank you very much. Now, in 2002, 2003, we had a conservative government in Canada. And I will tell you about the change, because it makes, it's quite different in terms of what happened. We were described by many people across the globe, many writers, as a system in crisis. They use the term crisis. Teachers felt beleaguered. They felt beaten up by the government. They felt they were called names. And many were leaving the profession in droves. It's amazing how many people said, I no longer want to be a teacher. So it was a very difficult time for education. Then we had a new government, headed by Prima McGuinty, and he promised to restore and renew the profession. He wanted people to be proud to become teachers. So we saw that very dramatic change. Fortunately, I was at that time what you would describe as a school superintendent. I became a superintendent very young. I was 24 years a superintendent. And I was asked by the Premier, there were 72 superintendents in Ontario in charge of school districts. I was asked by the Premier to come into the Ministry of Education to head up the strategy. And I said yes because of his attitude towards teachers, because he believed in the profession, and because he wanted to make real changes to the profession.
You must have done that with some trepidation, though, I'm assuming, at the time. Were you worried about how this was going to go?
I was worried, but because I had known so much about how to bring about change. I was known as a change leader in the school districts in which I worked. So I knew what it took, in a sense, that I wasn't overconfident, but I knew that if I respected teachers, if I listened to them and the principals, if I took time to understand what they needed in order to improve change, because we were told we had a specific target and goals to achieve. But I felt if I could bring teachers and principals along with me, move away from, the approach of beating up on them, but to develop a capacity building approach, I felt confident that I would have them with me. Because I believe too, if I may just finish that one sentence,
yeah.
If people knew what to do, they would have done it. If they aren't doing it, it means that we need to find out what their needs are, personalize their professional learning, and bring them along with us in a way that was much more humane, but demanding.
Humane but demanding. Now, this is an interesting tension, right? I think here we sometimes feel like it's one or the other. You can't have both, right? And we've tried, I think we've tried both over different times. Some would say mostly demanding, and not so humane. And in fact, it might have sounded familiar to many of us, right? When Avis described this sort of beleaguered, beaten down feeling, there had been strikes, right?
Oh,
Labor
yeah.
strikes. It had been very contentious. And, we obviously, many of our states and cities have gone through similar turmoil and still are. So we are at an interesting point here that you were at about 10 or 12 years ago.
Yes.
When we talked about what are some of the things that you and your colleagues did as part of these reforms, there were lots of things, but there were three characteristics of the reforms that really stuck with me that resonate, I think, from our point of view. One is that it was heavy on data. Which is kind of interesting, because that's kind of like our thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, we love data.
Yes.
We got a lot of data. Well, Stephanie, who you'll meet, she sent me some data that was even more over the top than the data that we collect here. It was like, whoa, they could break down every which way, every student, and whether they liked, potatoes and whatever. So there was a lot of data. The schools did have to set targets,
Yes.
like you said. So that sounds familiar, yes. I think, in the United States. They did have mandatory testing, which I believe happened 4 times over a student's career in 4th, 6th, 8th, and 10th grade. So less than we do, but still more than Finland. And the results were public, and everybody could see them.
Yes.
So heavy on data, but light on judgment.
Yes.
This is where the analogy ends. There was no punishment if you didn't meet your target.
No.
Now, as an American, and I mean that in the sense of not North American, that blows our mind.
I'm
We're
sure.
like, what?
Yes.
How can you have no consequence? And the third thing, before I ask you to comment on each of these, is that you did it by fixating on building the capacity
Yes.
of teachers.
Yes.
This is a tough one. As any school district leader in the United States or anywhere in the world will tell you, you can fixate on hiring better teachers and paying them more and picking out a better curriculum and blah, 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 but making them better teachers, that is at the core
Yes.
of the challenge.
Absolutely.
So let's start with heavy on data. What did that mean?
Heavy on data, it meant we had to know where we are. It may sound very conservative, if I may use that term, to focus on data, but we think we can only know if we're improving if we have the data. So we begin with the data. This is where we are now. This is how many of our students are improving in literacy and numeracy, and those were the 2 areas we started with: literacy, numeracy, graduation rates. Now we have added things like well-being, although we're not measuring well-being yet, but we consider it a more holistic approach, adding things like character development. So it's not only academics, but it's interpersonal as well. So the data were very important for us to know if we're improving. I do not consider that ultra-conservative at all. So we knew where we were beginning. We asked each school district to set targets. Again, that may seem ultra-conservative, but targets give us an idea of what to strive for, of how we're meeting our goals. And I've told you a few stories of one or two people who didn't want to set targets, but I can follow up on that later on. But the big thing in Ontario is capacity building. We listened to our teachers and principals. Those unions who were in strike for many, many years, we went out, reached out to them, recognizing that we cannot improve education without our unions. So I spent a lot of my time working with the unions, asking them to help me with capacity building.
You even gave them money, right?
I gave them a lot of my money. I said, can you come back to me in 2 weeks with a plan? I said to one union, you're going to focus on how to help children in poverty, and I want to see that plan. So I shared my budget with the unions, which at the time it was not a popular thing. But I believed in teachers, I believe in your representation, and I will always work well with their unions. So, and I hope I'll have a chance to tell you a story of one union. Why don't I do that quickly? One union, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, the union that I had asked to focus on poverty. One of the initiatives that they did, they commissioned a play called Danny in the Basement. It was about a young lad who lived in a basement and the challenges and so on. And they took it around the province. They had speaking points, questions, etc., to teach about poverty. Interestingly, ladies and gentlemen, after I retired, a school district asked me to come back to just examine their practices and to give them feedback. I said I had to talk to students as focus groups, and even the young ones. I was speaking to a group of maybe 7, 8-year-olds, asking them, what was it that you loved about school this year? A little boy said, me, miss. I said, what is it? There was a play called Danny in the Basement, and it taught us about poverty and so on. So what we did at the provincial level had percolated through to the classroom. And here was a student telling me about Danny in the Basement. The money we had given to the unions really made a difference.
You know, when you said that you could bring the unions in, not punish teachers, believe in teachers, and have targets and accountability. So you said demanding and humane, right?
Exactly.
There are people, reformers in the United States, probably in this room, who would say that's a paradox. If you don't require, at least in this country, if you don't put some pressure on schools, they will just abandon their kids, especially their kids of color.
Let me tell you that. What we talk about is positive pressure and support. Yes, there was one director of education, or we call them superintendent. There was one superintendent in our province. When we asked them to set targets, I got wind of the fact that she said she was not going to set any targets because they became public targets. And what if I don't achieve those targets? She did not want that embarrassment. When I heard about this, what did I do about it? I decided then to go out to meet with her. I told you I was not heavy-handed, but demanding. I went out to her district to meet with her, to talk about it, to find out what the issues were. Was she trying to send a message? What would it take? When I was leaving, she said, I want to set a 10% target. I said, no, that's too high based on your history. The demographics She had a large percentage of Aboriginal or First Nation students, and they had been struggling. Now, to suddenly set 10% target when I was there was not realistic. Targets must be attainable, they must be realistic and achievable. So we agreed on, I think, a 5% target. After speaking with you briefly, I tracked her down last week, and I asked her, did you achieve those targets? Yes, she did. And she said, by focusing on the Aboriginal students, all the students did better in her system.
And we will refer here to Aboriginal students, which is what we would call Native Americans in the United States.
Native
but
Americans.
Aboriginal students are the ones who have been still most left behind in
Yes.
Ontario and across Canada. So we'll talk more about that. How did you get her to go from no, I will not set a target, to a totally high, unrealistic target? How did that happen? How many hours were you there?
Oh, I wasn't there for very long, but you, in your introduction, Amanda, you talked about the moral imperative, and I was delighted when you said that, because I started with her in terms of the moral imperative, why we choose teaching in the first place. The fact that as educators, one of our responsibilities is to enhance the life chances of students. We do that not only for our country, because we want our country to be more competitive, to use that term, it doesn't have to be negative. That's important because I work globally and every country wants to be more competitive. But for the individual life chances of students. I said to her, education must extricate children from that life of poverty if you want them to achieve better. So by appealing, I would say all teachers who enter the profession have that sense of moral imperative. And even when they're jaded, they say if you scratch the surface of a cynic, you'll find a frustrated idealist. And I like that, because I can always talk to teachers and get them back to that sense of moral imperative. And 9 out of 10 times they will get back there.
What, was it important that there wasn't a punishment? Like, so you weren't going to shut down her school if she didn't
no.
succeed?
We do not believe in punishing people. Because of our beliefs about teachers and teaching, we talk with them to get them back to that sense of why they became teachers in the first place. There was no threat. I went to her as one professional to another to talk about the life chances of the students that we had committed to serve. So there was never a threat of shutting down her school at all.
What if there had been a threat?
Pardon me?
What if there had been a threat? How would that have gone differently? Do you
People
think?
resist threat. I think there is resentment. None of us wants to be threatened in our jobs. And when you create resentment among the professions, they can shut down so fast, it's incredible. You don't bring the best out of them. And that's what we believe in, bringing the best, reconnecting them to their sense of purpose. And we believe that's a better way than threatening them.
I, the other day, was talking at a conference, and there was an expert there on change management. This is a thing. There's a whole thing called change management. And she was saying how she has an equation in her head for how you know if a reform is going to work or not. So let's say R is the results of the reform, if it's going to work or not. R equals, it's very simple, don't worry. R equals the quality of the solution, so what it is you're trying to do and change, times the acceptance of the solution. The acceptance of the solution. And she said, everywhere she goes, organizations and people spend 95% of their time on the quality of the solution, the reform, and 5% of their time on the acceptance of the solution. And it should be the reverse, she's found, over and over again. Public sector, private sector, church, school, business. 95% of the emphasis needs to be on the acceptance, listening to what the fears and concerns and problems are, and not just appeasing it, but actually listening, and trying to figure out ways to work through it, create a plan, and so forth. So I think in the United States, if I could just quickly interject, because I think this is important, we have been doing quality, Q, times negative numbers in some places, or zero acceptance. So the results, there's a ceiling you're going to hit pretty fast for how much change you can get without acceptance, right? You just can't get, you can maybe get from here to here, but you can't get to here, right? But I think we feel like maybe we're a special case. We have a long, long history of institutionalized, systemic, cultural, social racism in this country, right? I mean, it's legal, everything. It's just entrenched, right? So we fear that if we don't really, turn the screws on people, they won't really stay focused. They won't really try. Like, they won't really give it their all and believe that all kids, can learn at high levels. Did you ever, maybe in Canada, people don't have that problem. People are like, nicer and more polite, and they're like, all kids can learn. I mean, is that?
No, we had the same entrenchment and sense that you have described. It's just that we approached it differently.
Tell me about the Statistical Neighbors tool and how you introduced it.
Okay, the Statistical Neighbors tool. When I started in my position, one of the first things we did, we said we wanted to collect data, again, to show people the schools in challenging circumstances that were doing better than anyone expected. So at the time, in 2002, 2003, we got a group together to put together this tool. What this tool did was they looked at every school in Ontario, looked at some of the issues like single-parent families, immigrant status, poverty, and so on, and developed a tool that would give us a sense of all of these demographic issues, because some people were saying, oh, well, we can't do as well here as we would do there because of the demographics. But we believe that demographics does not mean destiny. That's a belief. So when we did this tool, I remember the day when we were rolling it out to our principals. We had the principals. So the person who developed the tool, I would say to him, can you show me 20 schools in the most challenging circumstances, poverty and all of those issues, that are achieving the provincial standard? And they rolled that out. So what that did, it removed all the excuses for low performance. No longer could people say, we are poor, we can't do it, because they were seeing examples of schools in challenging circumstances. And I worked in Scotland, they use a term that are punching above their weight, although it's a militaristic term, but it's a nice way, schools punching above their weight. So when we developed that tool, it removed all excuses for low performance. It was a matter now of beginning to twin schools, schools in challenging circumstances that were doing well, working with others who are having challenges, and changing the mindset that those children over there with those demographics cannot do well. It was a show me culture. For some teachers, unless you can show me that those poor children who live in what we call Ontario housing, I don't know what you call that here, special housing. Yeah. Unless you can show me that those children can do as well as those middle-class kids, I won't believe it. But when we showed them the data, it removed the excuses. It was a matter now of helping them with the strategies, the skills, in order to make this happen.
So the first step is making people believe it's possible.
Yes.
And the best way, you said, is show me culture. I would argue the human brain is always about showing, not telling. And so that's great. And we can do that. We have done that here in many places. But the next step is building capacity, right? That's the last thing I'd like you to talk about. You talked a lot to me about how important research was in building capacity, because this is the real challenge. Right?
One of the first things we did when we started the Literacy and Numeracy Secretariat, which was what I headed as CEO, was to develop some key objectives. And one of them was to become more research informed. Everything we did or we do in Ontario is based on research. For example, I asked all the university professors to get together. I asked them to do some monographs asking teachers, what do you need to have more information on? For example, this is ESL in the mathematics classroom, boys underachievement. So teachers told us what they wanted more information on. We provided these monographs developed by university professors, and we had accompanying DVDs. And you can have access to all of those free. If I were you, I would download all of them. Hundreds of these monographs and DVDs from people all across the world who can tell and show how to teach certain. Let's say somebody says, I don't know how to do nonfiction reading and writing. We would find the person in the world who's doing that, develop a DVD, sending it out to the schools, so that teachers on their own time could engage in their own professional development. It was not a one-size-fits-all, but we paid attention to what each teacher said they needed and provided these wonderful DVDs for them to learn at their own pace. So I hope you will access those on the Ministry of Education website, both the capacity building series and the DVDs. I was in Holland recently. I met a teacher who said, every week I download a DVD and I use it. So they're being used all across the world.
It's interesting because I like how short these are. What? Boys underachievement. 4 pages. Done. Okay, so this is not easy. I mean, were these peer reviewed, or how did you get a consensus?
Yes. There are 2 types of them, for example. Those that we call the What Works research into practice were done by professors and they were peer reviewed. The others, because I wanted to do so many so quickly, we call those the capacity building series. Those are done by my staff. They're no less research informed, but the professors wanted theirs to be distinctive because they are peer reviewed.
Yeah, as professors. Yeah.
So we have 2 of them, the capacity building and the What Works research into practice. They are phenomenal, but even more phenomenal are the DVDs, which can be downloaded any part of the world, how to teach any subject, an hour and a half long, that help to build the capacity of our teachers in a personalized way.
There are many hundreds of questions I could ask you about building capacity, and there are probably people here who would maybe like to talk to you if you have time afterward, because there's a lot to this, right? And it's so critical to our success in moving beyond just top-down pressure. What I'd like to do now is, first of all, Avis, I want to thank you so much for being here and for sharing some of your stories with us. Let's give Avis a round of applause.
Thank you.
And then we're going to bring Khadija and Meryl back to the stage, and we're going to welcome Stephanie Fearon as well. So come on up, guys. And Stephanie, we are very glad to have Stephanie here as well. She was a teacher for years in high-need schools. Now she works district-wide across the Toronto district on equity issues. So trying to figure out, can you make an entire system, not just a classroom or a school, but an entire system more equitable? Stephanie, so I'd like to start with you. And so this is the last conversation we're going to have here today, and I want to, Avis did a beautiful job giving us some of the history and some of the challenges along the way. I want to bring us up to date right now and say, what have you yet to do? What has not succeeded the way you need it to succeed? What's next?
Well, right now for the Toronto District, I work in the Equity Department at the Toronto District School Board. Prior to that, I worked in the Model Schools for Inner City Department, and we really just focus on our underserved populations within the Toronto District School Board. And we are data-driven, we are research-driven as well, just as Dr. Glaze mentioned. And we noticed from looking at the data that we still have groups and communities of students in our system that are not achieving. And a lot of those students that we look at the research and say, what is not working? We talk to the students, we talk to the families, as well as we talk to our teachers and our district leaders. So right now, our Indigenous populations, we are still historically We have not done a good job, and it continues to do so. We are working on it, as well as our Black populations, as well as our Spanish-speaking communities as well. So those are our three big communities that we are really, really intentionally doing a lot of work. And again, we use the data, we use the research, we use the capacity building series quite frequently as well.
What is your best guess? Let's talk about the indigenous peoples. What is your best theory of the case for what will work in Ontario and Toronto?
Well, right now, when my department, so I work with the equity department, we work very closely with the university professors as well as our research department. So the Toronto District School Board spends a lot of money on our research department. And what we found was that we really need to get into culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. That idea of we have to know our students, we have to build relationships. Relationships are so important with our Indigenous communities. Because of the historical tension, the historical atrocities that have happened on our Indigenous peoples, we have to really build back trust. And building back trust and strengthening our relationships require us to listen.
How does teacher preparation, the training of teachers, the teacher colleges, how does that connect with this need to build relationships and trust? How do you, let's back up. Is it hard to get into teacher college in Canada?
Right now, the teaching profession in Canada is well respected. It has gotten to the point where everybody wants to be a teacher, it seems. It's extremely competitive to get into, to the point where you have to do a 4-year degree, a bachelor's degree first, before you could do a Bachelor of Education degree.
And how does one get accepted? If I wanted to become a teacher, what would I need to do with my resume to...
It is not just about the academics. So you have to do community service. You have to be in the classrooms as volunteers. We look very highly at the Toronto District School Board about people who have done community service in underserviced areas as well. Afterwards, you do your application, you have to do a letter of interest as well. You have to say, what is that? Why do you want to become a teacher when there are thousands of applicants for very few spots in Teachers College? And now for the largest university, Teachers College University in Ontario, they even do interviews with applicants before they even accept you into Teachers College.
What are they looking for? Do you know?
They're looking for people who can build relationships, people who are passionate about teaching, about change, about learning. And because of that, we get a group of teachers into our field, into, the system that really want to learn, that really listen and have shown throughout the years before even applying to Teachers College that they are passionate. And another thing that we do within that the province, the Ministry of Education has mandated for all school boards is that when you do get hired as a teacher, we have the new teacher induction program. And the new teacher induction program pairs you up with a mentor, an experienced teacher, so that when you feel overwhelmed, when you're not sure how to support student learning in your classroom, formally you have a mentor to go to and to help you through that process.
So did you work in a classroom before you applied to teacher college?
Before I applied to Teachers College, I did extensive volunteer work in one of the toughest neighborhoods in Toronto. It was my passion, it is my calling. And afterwards, when I made my application, I even had to go through an interview process for them to even consider me to be get into Teachers College.
Was that time volunteering in the classroom, why was that important for you? I mean, I know it helped you get into the university, but did it actually affect your decision, or why is that important?
It's important because everybody has this idea of what teaching is. Oh, I'm going to help some children. Oh, I'm going to teach them how to read. It's going to be easy. But when you are in that classroom setting and you realize the challenges that there are in education, and you realize the opportunities that education offers to students and to teachers themselves, it makes a huge difference. And it's a way for us to kind of weed out who's really serious about the profession and who isn't.
Instead of waiting until they're already in charge of the
Right.
classroom. This is a huge deal.
Oh, and
I
if
mean,
I
this
may...
is, I just want to be very clear. Go ahead.
And if I may add, even after you graduate from Teachers College, it is very difficult to get a job because it is that competitive. And what is very interesting, I find, with the Toronto District School Board, which is our largest school board, I think it's the third or fourth
and
largest.
Just to interject, in Canada, it's called school board is like the school district. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's different than our school boards. Thanks be to God. Okay, go.
So we have about 560 schools in the board or in the district. And our inner city schools are seen as houses of innovation, best teaching practice. So the idea of teaching in an inner city school is something to be proud of,
Those are the model schools,
which
right?
are model schools. So we even call our inner city schools, we call them model schools. Because these are the schools that really the entire system should be modeling after. So as a teacher, to work in an inner city model school is something to be proud of, something where I know I will be at the cutting edge of innovation and change in education.
Do those teachers get paid more?
Every teacher across, whether you're in an affluent area or in an inner city, we all get paid the same amount.
So how do you convince teachers that this is going to be awesome? You're going to be in this school that's like incredibly hard and it's going to be, you know, like grueling. How do you make that cool? Like how do you make that appealing?
So what we did, so when I worked for Model Schools for Inner Cities, we have 150 schools that have been determined that have students who are living at or below the poverty level. So when you work in a school like that, the government, so the ministry as well as the school district actually gives extra money to the schools. So you get a lot of extra money, a lot of extra support, both financial and in human resource.
So you don't make more money, but you have like as many iPads as you want. Is that basically?
No, so what we did was, for the Toronto District School Board, we mirrored what the ministry was doing, to be honest. We learned that we had to show people, like Dr. Glaze said. So we do a student census survey, a parent census survey as well, every 5 years. And what we ask the students are, you know, do you have a caring adult in the school? We ask them about how they self-identify racially, what languages they speak. Afterwards, we work with our research department, with the ministry, as well as with the universities to develop this program that is specialized for the school. All the programs are based on 3 principles. The first one is the idea that the school is the heart of the community. That in order to effectively make change in a school, we have to work with our parent and family communities. So the school really becomes a hub. In the schools, they are usually open until 8 p.m. We hire other staff to run programs for students so that the school really becomes this community center. We also hire community support workers. Their only purpose of being is facilitating that relationship between the parents and the schools. Because we know from the data, especially with our Indigenous communities, that parents do not always trust the school system because of historical experiences that have happened. So we put a lot of money into community support workers. The second one is the idea of innovative teaching. So we use the capacity building series. We speak to professors, we speak to other experienced teachers to find out what is the cutting edge of education. So that might look like inquiry-based learning. That might look like culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. So we look at those and we develop professional learning communities within every school. So we get money from the ministry as well as the school district to say every week, a group of teachers are going to be released just to talk about student learning and using data from the classroom as well as from the provincial level to impact our learning. The third is physical and socio-emotional well-being. Everything that we do has to speak into the well-being of the child because we believe it is holistic. So in a lot of our inner city schools, we actually have free pediatric clinics. We actually have telepsychiatry, so that even if a psychiatrist is not in the building, we could use technology to support student and parent well-being. We also test all of our students in up to grade 4, and then we do it again in grade 7 if they need glasses. We found out from the data, from the research, that if a child can't see, that's going to impact teaching and learning. And we actually provide all of our children with free glasses, free hearing aids as well. And dental. So we have a dentist come into all of our schools to check the dental hygiene of our students, but because we realize that all this impacts student learning.
So I want to bring Meryl and Khadija into the conversation. Thank you, Stephanie. I wonder, Stephanie talked about how competitive it is to become a teacher. From a principal's point of view, how easy is it to find great teachers, and how do you hire, and how much freedom do you have to do that?
So a lot of that freedom is given to me as a principal when it comes to the people who apply. And Dr. Glaze talked about the capacity building. So teachers come into that interview very prepared. But we are also very upfront in terms of what our school mission statement of equity and excellence for all means to us. And one of the capacity building series monographs we actually include in the invitation to the candidates, asking them to please take the time to read what culturally relevant teaching means to us. It is incredible. The challenge we have then of selecting out of the 5 candidates that we likely interview for a position, how to select that one. But they find out very quickly that they want to work in a school that's focused on that. And it's interesting, as we've had this conversation, we keep hearing that word believe in terms of what we mean to students. It became the shirt that every teacher wore on our first day when we opened our doors. And I still remember kids asking, what does this word believe mean? And we were very upfront, even to the point of even in our school, there's a mosaic that has every child's fingerprint. Yes, you open a brand new school, you want to leave something that kids remember, and their fingerprint is on that mosaic, and on the very bottom it says the word believe. Because at the core of everything that teachers mean to us, we also believe in them. Dr. Glaze said it beautifully. When they feel that support, it's incredible what happens in terms of what they're given permission to do, because that also then builds their capacity. And one of the parts that also it comes into the interviewing process, we feel very fortunate to be partnered with organizations like the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, where they gave us a year-long study in terms of what equity means in schools. And a documentary was created of our school in that journey. And it's on our website, Irma Coulson Public School. It's the only one you'll come up when you Google it. It's amazing in terms of when we get to document that. So teachers are also aware how quickly they can recruit their friends to come to our school. And the word of mouth spreads in terms of what our school is about and how we're attracting teachers that come with that passion in terms of that word believe.
You know, I said earlier that Canada wasn't like Finland, but there are 2 important ways that I'm realizing Canada is like Finland. One way is that it is very difficult to get into teacher college in Finland and Canada, but they don't just, so we know that that's true in most of the smartest countries in the world, right? It's selective, it's difficult to get in, and that adds prestige. You know, whether or not you end up with better teachers, it does add respect to the profession when you make it a difficult club to get into. There's no way around that. But in both places, interestingly, you're not selecting based on GPA or test score necessarily alone, or even primarily, right? In Finland, there's this dirty little secret, right? Well, it's not that dirty, but there's a secret, which is that almost everyone who goes to ed school in Finland first spends a year volunteering as a classroom aide, because you just can't get in unless you do that. So guess what happens? The weeding out you described. It was very clever, right? You spend a year, like let's say there's one teacher that I was talking to who spent a year in a classroom with 12 high-need, behaviorally challenged boys. Those little petite Finnish girl. She had a lot of dark nights in that job, right? Where she questioned, do I really want to do that? She was not the classroom teacher, but she was an aide. And by the end, she decided she really did want to do that. And so she applied, she was selected, and it was an important part of not only weeding out, but her process of deciding, is this really for me? This is an incredibly clever scheme they've got going. Now, I would point out that the United States has more classroom aides per capita than any country in the world. We have a ton of aides, okay? So this is maybe an opportunity for some state or district to use that and say, you know, we are going to require people to have some experience in the classroom beforehand, and probably Teach for America has some interesting thoughts on whether that experience actually converts or not. I know they've struggled to find the right selection process, the right training process. You know, one of the big controversies, obviously, with Teach for America is that they do not require a 2 years master's degree, but they train you over the summer and then give you a lot of support increasingly as you go. So this is, you know, this is a tricky thing, but it is something that I think we see in common. And the other thing we see in common with Finland and Canada is this idea of research being central not only to the work, but the mindset of teachers. So the idea that you are an original researcher. If you're a teacher, you're running experiments in your classroom. You know, you're running A/B experiments all the time. You're reading research, you're continuously learning, which, you know, makes sense on its face, that if you're an educator, you should be continuously learning, right? But most schools in the United States do not have that culture. Go ahead.
And just to add about the research, so right now with the ministry and in collaboration with the Toronto District School Board and all the school districts, is that we actually have teacher researchers. So we believe that our teachers actually are capable and experienced enough to conduct research in their own classrooms, and we do this in very different ways. One example is we have the Teachers Learning and Leading program. And what that is that me, just as a classroom teacher, I have this amazing idea about how to improve, you know, boys' literacy in my classroom. I write up a proposal, I send it to the ministry, they actually give me money, release time, and support to run this in my classroom, my idea. And then what I do is at the end, I write up, you know, my findings, and I share it with the entire province. That is very powerful.
How do you share it with the whole province?
Because it's all part of a program. So I send it up to the ministry. They have a date where if you want to conduct research in your classroom under it's called the TLLP program, so the Teacher Learning and Leading program. You write it up, you fill out the application. You talk about what your findings are, your puzzling moment, what resources that you need access to, the steps that you want to take. I send it to the district, they look it over, we send it up to the ministry, and the ministry contacts us and say, this is what we're going to give you. You gave us a breakdown of your budget. I agree with you. This is an amazing opportunity to do this in your classroom, with the expectation that you will write a little report, a video, and we will share it on our website with the entire province. And that is available for everybody for free around the world on the ministry website.
Do teachers actually look at it? And
Yes.
How do you know?
Because it's all tracked when you click on.
So a lot of people are clicking on these.
And it's something prestigious to do because it highlights this school, but it feeds into this culture of research, not just as a researcher coming in and looking at
Right.
our school, but the idea that us as teachers, every day we conduct some form of inquiry. Oh, let me try this with, you know, Johnny. Let me try this with Devante. Let me see how this works. But the idea that my ministry and my school board and my union supports my initiative with money and with time release and other support is a fabulous way to build capacity within the school.
Interesting. So I think we've established that a great school has teachers who are researchers. I think it probably is fair to say that a great school also has students who are researchers, who are researching original questions that captivate them. Khadija, could you talk a little bit about, I know that your school did an equity audit. It's like a walkthrough to make sure, and different schools can do this around Toronto and the province, and make sure it actually is equitable. And then tell us about the piece of that you did.
So we all split up into different groups, and the group that I was working with, we wanted to ask students if they felt that their voice was valued. And so what we did was we took this large piece of chart paper and we drew like this number line from 1 to 4. And so we called like different grades down and asked them if they felt that the school was listening to their opinions and how they wanted to learn and how they wanted to see the school run. And so we gave them all like the sticker, and then they would place it wherever they felt they saw the school going.
And how did they feel the school was doing?
The results turned out to be very positive, so that was
Were you
good.
nervous? Were you like, oh no, what if
Yeah.
everybody's like 0?
I was definitely nervous because one of the questions was access to the principal, and I was wondering how I was going to do on that one as well.
How'd you do?
Not bad.
Okay. You don't want to be too accessible. I mean, you don't want to be a 4 on access. You don't do anything else, right? So tell me, Meryl, from your point of view, was this equity walkthrough useful, or was it just kind of like check the box, you know, like superficial?
It was so relevant, and it was relevant for our teachers to know the difference they were making. The difference they were making in terms of the conversations that we were so intentional about as well. We talk about that moral imperative, and it's amazing when you can bring that at every staff meeting. You can bring it in terms of teachers sharing their best practice. One of the highlights I have in staff meetings in our PD is when we have teachers walk into each other's classrooms. So you make it public. And I think that's something that's also been so much a part of my journey, that when you do that, you're also then seeing the children take pride in terms of what they're doing. I have the unique pleasure of being in a school that's a dual-track school. So I have a French immersion program running alongside an English program. And in Ontario, it's a very strong model, but it sometimes can create an elitist approach sometimes to education. And in our situation, you would never know that our school has French immersion or English. We have students who we care about, who know they come to school every day, and their success matters to us.
So I couldn't pick out who's in the French immersion based on looking at them.
You could not. And even the structure of the school, and it's interesting even things that we were intentional about as well, that students who were in grade, I'll use one example, grade 1, they did not know that they were missing out on something. That their friends were maybe in French immersion and they were not. There was never that comparison. And it's interesting, Dr. Glaze was talking about visitors from Holland. We had 40 visitors come into our school from Holland. And instead of the principal taking them for the tour, it were our student ambassadors that took them around from class to class. And not one of them could distinguish the fact that there was a French immersion program, English program, but it was about what it is the students were conveying back to them in terms of what our school was about. And that to me is so much reflective in terms of the permission we've given our students to say, this is your school. And to be that facilitator in that, and not to also feel that we have to be the one up at the front all the time.
That must be difficult, though, sometimes. You want to control the messaging, right? So you have to let go a little bit. Stephanie, I'm going to let you have the last word, and then we're going to wrap up.
So I work right now with over 150 schools with the equity department. And all of our schools do equity walkthroughs like Meryl has spoken to. Not all of our schools are a level 4. We have schools that are that have scored themselves a little low. But what we do is it's not a judgment where we come in and say, oh no, you did horrible, this is bad, we're going to close down the school. They contact my department and I come in and I support them in looking at the ways where we can ensure that our students all feel welcomed, all feel belonged, and all feel that they are achieving to the best that they can. And this looks differently for different schools. As you mentioned at the beginning, we have 3 Afrocentric schools. We have pre-kindergarten schools, so the idea of starting school early from 3 years old in the summertime. We also have First Nations schools. We also have triangle programs for students that identify as LGBTQ. Because we know from the data that there are communities that feel that they don't belong. And we really try our best, working with our unions, working with the ministry, working with administrators, to make sure that every child feels as though they belong. And that looks different for different schools. And that is why it is so important that we are data-driven as well as research-driven. And as you showed, the researcher isn't just the one that is in the university. The researcher is also the principal, the teacher, as well as the student.
Thank you. I'm glad you ended on the point that there are schools that do not perform well on the equity walkthrough, because one of the problems with comparing countries is that you sometimes tend to glorify other countries and make them sound like unrealistically perfect. When we were talking before this, Meryl said to me, racism doesn't just happen in America. And it's true, and it's important to remember that, every country that I've studied, every country I've been to has plenty of problems. And nobody is more critical of their own system than the people in it. Everywhere I go, people have complaints and concerns and anxieties about their system, as they should. This is important, hard work. I thank you so much, all of you, Avis and Meryl and Khadija and Stephanie. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of you. Have a great rest of your conference.